Just waiting for Aaron to join us. Here he
There
comes.
we go.
Hey, hello there, Aaron.
No, I got stuck behind a train on West Center Street coming back through Lexington, and it was one of those you sit there and count. And I think I counted 100 cars.
Oh my goodness. They said I don't see trains around here much.
Well,
Anyways, where are we?
we had gone through the list on how Sutton, how Amy Bird had shown examples of the 13 stages, 13 rules that were given. And I just wanted to start off today to talk about sort of the origins of all of this, if that's all right.
Yeah, I can say this about Alinsky, that somehow he does not connect. I do not connect with his rules. I find him to be a liar, a deceiver, a jester, a man seeking power at any cost, a moral relativist, and yet he contradicts himself by postulating his own images for the future. So for some reason, now in philosophy, my undergraduate major, I learned one thing, many things actually, but sometimes when I would be trying to understand a point of view and I couldn't get it and it was like stuck and it wasn't working, I came to the conclusion that sometimes the problem wasn't with me. The problem was with the view that I was trying to understand and make sense of. And that was kind of liberating.
And
Um,
it's funny, Donald, that you bring that up because that was the direction I was getting ready to go with today to explain how we get here.
okay. Well, something isn't connecting. He strikes me as a liar and a deceiver, and anything goes, anything justifies the means. The ends justify the means. So anything you do to get ahead and grab the power from the haves is okay. And I just can't connect with that.
All right. What you're dealing with Alinsky is that he is a practical, pragmatic Marxist thinker. Okay. Do you understand Alinsky is a convinced Marxist, but unlike most Marxists, he is both practical and pragmatic. Marxists tend to be high thought philosophy types, which my mom long used to have a saying where she said you'd be too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. And the majority of your Marxists are too heavenly minded to be any earthly good, if that makes any sense.
I hear you.
Alinsky was an incredibly intelligent man, but he was also incredibly blue collar, incredibly pragmatic, incredibly practical. Alinsky is to Marx what a auto mechanic is to a auto engineer. Somebody in Detroit that is designing the cars, and I've heard what a lot of mechanics talk about this. All right, you have these really ingenious mechanical engineers that design the engines. Like if you go out and pop the hood on your car and look at the engine, these genius engineers design the engines, and the engines work perfectly, but they design them in a controlled environment. They design them outside of the engine well. They design them almost in isolation from what the engine should be doing. So when you take your car to the mechanic may not know the math behind the way the engine works. The mechanic may not know how any of the theory that goes into the engine design and creating this ecotech engine and how it's going to What the mechanic knows is which bolts to turn and which belts to change.
Gotcha.
And like when we were rebuilding my grandpa Papa Snyder's 86 and a half Nissan hardbody truck, we popped open the hood to change out we had to change the head gasket out. Well, to get the head gasket out, you've got to take the intake and the exhaust off the head. Exhaust is no problem. It was just 6 bolts, pop it off, pop the gasket, pop it off. All right. The intake had 8 bolts holding it on. 7 of the 8 bolts you could reach from just popping the hood. The 8th bolt, when the engine was sat down in the engine well, was up against the wheel well. The only way you could get the intake off the head would be to remove the engine in its entirety to get to that 1 bolt. I know this sounds like an odd example, but Karl Marx was an engineer. He designed Marxism by sitting in the London Library's reading room day after day, by studying philosophy, by studying primarily Plato and going through all of these things. What Marx designed was an idealistic utopian situation.
Wait, it just came in.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Levin's American Marxism, which I'm looking forward to reading.
Actually, a minute, I might get that book. That looks interesting.
And
But
he has another book, his most recent book called On Power.
mm-hmm. But Karl Marx is writing from a very sterile philosophical environment about utopian idealism. Lenin was really the first to realize early on that while he was a convinced Marxist, what Marx wrote in Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto and all that was not pragmatic. There was not a system to introduce it into a messy world. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
So Lenin looked.
How would you describe in a thumbnail sketch Marxism? Marx's Marxism.
Marx's Marxism is based off the Hegelian dialectic, where you have to rise through these different stages of history, and history is constantly progress.
Okay.
And you go into philosophical levels of feudalism, and feudalism by necessity must produce capitalism. And capitalism must go through its natural life cycle until you get to a point where you have an oligarchy based by the bourgeoisie who have destroyed all the rest of the leadership. And it is at that point you're going to get the education of the proletariat, and the proletariat will ultimately uprise and, in a dialectical sense, overthrow the bourgeoisie and take control of the means of manufacture.
Okay.
That's the best thumbnail, because I mean, then you get into the side things like this is where you get religion as the opiate of the masses. They say that through every one of these stages, religion is used to basically cause the masses, the proletariat, to forget about their conditions on the world so that those who are in power can continue to control power.
Such an anti-Christ view.
And it is. I'm not defending the view.
Yeah, understood.
But what I'm saying is Marx is an idealist. He is the engineer working on the engine outside of the engine well, outside of conditions. Lenin comes in and he takes Marx's ideas.
It's fair to say that Marx was an atheist.
Yes. Well, all right. Sort of.
By the way, I don't believe atheists exist. I believe a claiming atheist is basically a liar. that there are times when the light pings in on him and he knows, but he represses. And I'm moved to that view by Romans 1:18 and following.
And
And
I agree.
I interrupt. Go ahead.
I think Marx used atheism as a tool.
Well,
I honestly believe, all right, let's see how far back we can go in your memory to your undergraduate. Do you remember reading Hegel?
I remember him, not reading him, but being taught about him in the history of philosophy.
If you read Hegel, and I got into Hegel because of Schaff, because Schaff was educated by Neander, and Neander was educated by Schleiermacher, and Schleiermacher was writing from the same perspective that Hegel was. Schleiermacher was philosophically a Hegelian, even though he was a contemporary with Hegel,
Okay.
which is where you get the panentheism and all of that. So I had to read primary Hegelian's primary sources by Hegel.
In seminary or
in,
undergrad?
in seminary and in my own personal reading.
Okay.
It's why I always hold Schaff at sort of a distance, but that's neither here nor there.
Take a detour. Why?
Okay, I hold Schaff's historical writings of the highest value.
Okay.
I hold Schaff's theological writings at an arm's length.
Okay.
Because Schaff was a theological liberal. He was an honest historian, but a theological liberal.
Whoa, that's a new angle.
If you read Creeds of Christendom, there are some implicit liberal ideas liberal in that time period, if you understand what I'm saying, like what the higher critical ideas in Schaff.
I am working through Schaff. You say Schaff?
I say Schaff.
I'm working through Schaff's Creeds of Christendom as we speak. I'm still in volume 1 with the early, not from Nicaea to Chalcedon. I'm also reading his History of the Christian Church, the 8 volumes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm working on his 38 or 39 volume Ante-Nicene Fathers, Nicene Fathers, and Post-Nicene Fathers. So I will certainly keep my eyes open to that. I've seen him make some nutty remarks, even on Calvin. He talks about Calvin being strict and rigid, and it didn't quite connect because I know the Calvin I know is very cautious and careful. But anyways,
But
an
no,
interesting rabbit trail on Schaff.
I mean, I don't want you to discount his historical work
I understand.
because he actually is a spectacular scholar. I
Yes,
call into question his actual legitimate Christian credentials,
gotcha.
if that makes any sense.
I'm alerted.
All right. But you have this Hegelian philosophy, and Hegelian philosophy, which is the philosophical basis of Marxism, actually has an undercurrent of Gnosticism, neo-Gnosticism in it that stems from the secret societies that are all floating around in Germany at that time. And it's where the whole idea.
Which, let me just throw this out that Gnosticism is a very hard animal to determine because there were like 10 or 15 various Gnostic strains in the early church. But as to the secret knowledge that only the gnosis,
That's what I'm defining Gnosticism as.
on that.
The select having the secret knowledge, and salvation is based off the secret knowledge. In the Hegelian dialectic, it is implicit in the idea that there is an overall creator who allows progress through time. And that progress through time is developed through these two different conflicting ideas coming together, the two antitheses coming together and forming, well, you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis, to where you get the synthesis. And that synthesis is developed by an elite with a secret knowledge that know how to bring it together.
I remember being at 10th Presbyterian one Sunday evening, and Jim Boyce went into Hegelianism. I was sitting next to a Jewish Christian and a classmate at Westminster, and my classmate leaned over to me. Sharon and I were there, and he leaned over. He says, "Dr. Boyce doesn't understand Hegelianism," and Jim Boyce presented what you're talking about: antithesis, uh, thesis, with the resultant synthesis.
Well, I'm laughing because your Jewish friend would have understood the underlining where the Gnosticism in it comes from. Where the Gnosticism comes from in these thinkers in these secret societies was the embrace of Kabbalah. Do you know what Kabbalah is?
I connected with
Kabbalah.
that in the studies on Masonry.
All right. This Masonry is a secret society that comes from all of this. Gnosticism, all right. I wasn't planning on going this far back, but we can get there. I can do this. I can get us there.
Okay.
All right. You've got the destruction of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Christianity had been scattered prior to the destruction of Jerusalem because of the persecution of Christians by the Jews during the period before the destruction of Jerusalem. So Paul is all over Macedon and all of that. You've got Christianity floating out. With the destruction of the temple, Old Testament Judaism died. So the only legitimate inheritor of Old Testament Judaism is Christianity, because we are the only sect of Judaism. And I'm doing this from an academic stance. Please don't go against my words from a religious stance. Christianity is the last sect of Judaism that remains alive after the destruction of the temple. There are Pharisaical synagogues all throughout the empire, but even with those Pharisaical synagogues, they are still tied into the temple before the destruction of the temple, because they take the temple sacrifices literally. Hence, they're having to take up collections to take to the temple and all that and all the rest of this. When Judaism collapsed, you get the Council of Mazaria and you get all that. That's where you get some of the slight rewrites to the Old Testament books, which is why you will find a difference between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint. If you've ever dug into that very deeply, you get weird issues. But the Council of Mazaria goes back, rejects the Septuagint, and establishes the 39 books of the Old Testament as we have, as the official Jewish text. The rabbis end up laying claim to the Talmud and making the Talmud the official definition of what Judaism is. Whereas the temple had been the center. So you may have Essenes, you may have Pharisees, you may have Sadducees, you have the Zealots, you have all these different Jewish groups. They all focused on the temple. With the destruction of the temple, there was a question, what do we do? How do we define Judaism? Well, they end up latching on to the Babylonian Talmud over against the Jerusalem Talmud because of the sheer number of Jews that existed in Babylon at that point in time. The Babylonian Talmud, if you go through it, is highly influenced by Zoroastrian and Manichaean thought. Sit and read through the Babylonian Talmud sometime if you've got any comparative religious studies in you, because it's sort of interesting. Well, the Manichaean thought ends up becoming a thread that the rabbis latch on to. And what you end up getting by the 9th century is the writing of the Zohar in Spain. The Zohar claims to be an earlier document, and it's possible that it is, but there's no textual proof of it. They say it's secret teachings that have been, go back to the Gnostics, it is secret teachings that have been passed down from Moses. This is where the argument between the written law and the traditional law comes from. Because if you've ever studied Judaism, they'll say the Torah is the written law or the Tanakh is the written law. But they have all these other unspoken laws that some of them are codified in the Talmud and some of them are not. And they'll say the reasoning for that is if you study Hasidic Judaism, they're real big into this, that these laws were given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, but God commanded Moses to pass them down through the Levites rather than to write them down. And they have received this secret knowledge that has been passed down through the Levites, like the Baal Tev Shev and all the rest of that, which was a messianic figure during the 15th century. It gets crazy, but basically what you have is Kabbalah popping up out of the Zohar tradition. And what Kabbalah posits is the tree of life. And the tree of life is composed of all these different serapho, I can't pronounce it. Anyway, it looks like seraphim, but it's not seraphim, which are emanations from God. You remember in Gnosticism?
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
And basically
I think
what
that
happened,
some of them call it the demiurge, I think.
right, and that's present. All right. But these Sephiroth, that's the word. These Sephiroth are emanations from God because they say God during the creation ended up basically, this is not the word they use, but it's the way it always comes across to me, exploded. And there are all these little shards of God all in the world. So if you ever hear a Jew talk about doing a mitzvah,
Yeah.
what a mitzvah literally is collecting shards of God through good deeds, actions, and holiness, and restoring God by going through this tree of life through the Sephiroth. And the rabbis hold this secret knowledge.
Well,
Okay. During the Renaissance, the Roman Catholic secret sects of Roman Catholics laid a hold of the Zohar and the Kabbalah, and they started to incorporate it. We see it come over into Anglicanism through John Dee. It is implicit in some of John Donne's writing. John Donne, who's the poet, the Elizabethan poet, Donne.
oh, John Donne,
Yeah,
Donne.
yeah. John Dee explicitly was Elizabeth's wizard, but you see it even in some of the metaphysical poets where they've latched on to some of these Kabbalistic ideas. You see it in Meister Eckhart where he has latched on to some of it. You see it in some Anabaptist sects where they latch on to huge portions of it. If you look at Anabaptist, the early Anabaptist period, and it's carried over some, they are almost in the beginning explicitly Kabbalistic, where they reject the Old Testament and embrace only the New, almost like a neo-Marcionite movement. But you see all these Jewish Kabbalistic ideas creeping over. And after after Protestant Orthodoxy arises, after the Council of Trent, after we get through Turgeon, Chemnitz, and Bellarmine, you see the church itself in all three forms contracting back, reestablishing a rigid orthodoxy. Well, what it did was it drove these Christian Kabbalists back underground. They popped back up in these secret societies. So you get the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati was a real thing. I mean, it got quashed real quick, but it was a real thing. You see it being pushed by some Jesuit circles, which is why the Jesuits eventually end up becoming liberal over time. It had gotten into the Franciscans through some remnants of the Cathars that had migrated in. It shows up in some of the later Moravians. It shows up in the Pietistic movement. But these secret societies end up predominating all over Europe. The Masons are the ones that we have talked about, but that was because they were so instrumental in the English-speaking world. And they end up basically forming a large cohort of the American Revolution. All the rest of that, they were involved behind the scenes in the English Civil War, a couple other ways. They get entrenched in certain segments of Scottish Presbyterianism, which is why the Scottish Rite is so dominant in America. But in continental Europe, they become more and more anti-Christian. They end up being the ones that drive, these secret societies are the ones that drive the French Revolution. They are the ones that basically take over the universities. There is an argument that these secret societies are the ones that pushed higher criticism within the church in order to devalue the sacred text. Hegel was involved in one of these societies, and in his writings, you can read it. Swedenborgianism is another one that comes out of that doesn't get spoke about much today. It could be argued that Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, is one of them. The concept of universalism, Unitarianism, are both derived out of it. But these secret societies take over academia, and most of your higher ranking scholars are members of these societies. And these ideas creep into Hegelian writing. And from Hegel, you get it going to Neander, you get it going into Christianity with the creation of higher criticism, with the modernist movement, all of that within the church. With Marxism, you get it coming in by Marx being a student of Hegel himself, or at least highly read in him. He's in the tradition, and he develops his whole utopian system based off of Hegelian philosophy. Darwinism is a branch of Hegelian philosophy, Darwinistic evolution, because what you see is this constant progress, this evolution. You see that in Marx's writing. It's just Marx has an end point, whereas Darwin does not. You see it in Teilhard de Chardin. If you read the Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin, he is a Hegelian Darwinist, dressed up in Jesuit clothes. But Marx basically is a pure pawn philosophical guy. What you get with Lenin is taking what Marx wrote and making it practical for the Russian situation. And here we're back to where I wanted to start.
Okay.
With
take as long as you need.
With Alinsky, you get a pragmatist taking Marx and making him practical for a Western civilization. Lenin takes Marx and creates.
Are you saying Alinsky is assuredly and devotedly a pure Marxist?
Yes.
He seems to hide that in his Rules for Radicals. And this other commentator, Hedgepeth, says that he's an avowed Marxist, like you're saying.
All right, Donald, I want you to stop for a second and read for rules of think about your reading of rules for radicals. You hide your ultimate intention.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
So
Yes.
he is not going to come out and admit he's a Marxist because he's writing this in the late 60s during the height of the Cold War. And if he comes out and directly says he's a Marxist, what's going to happen? Nobody's going to read it.
Gotcha.
Basically, what you have is a disease infiltrating the system. And the disease infiltrates by hiding what it is. Alinsky takes Marx's ideas and he adapts them in such a way that they work in American culture. You asked the question Friday, why would Sutton be using these ideas? How would Amy Bird become this? Because what Alinsky ended up doing is he basically created a system that was adopted by academics. And the academics take it and they teach it in the schools, in the colleges, in the universities. I mean, go back to the late 60s. A lot of leftists, just for the church itself, a lot of leftist draft dodgers realized that if they were in school, they could dodge the draft legally.
Many went to seminary to avoid the
So
draft.
they went to seminary to avoid the draft. Now, these people are convinced Marxists, they're convinced socialists, they're hippies, they're all this. Well, the war ends and they have a master's of divinity.
Gotcha.
What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Well, about half of them end up going back and getting a higher degree, and they end up taking positions in the seminaries. Or if they've been in academia, in order to make a living, they take a position in the universities. The other half go into churches. They have read Alinsky. So they have cut their long hippie hair, shaved their beards, took a bath, put on the right clothes,
Yeah.
but they're still convinced of their ideology. Alinsky provides them with a very basic way in order to change the system from the inside out. So how does Sutton get it? Sutton gets it through his education. How does Amy Bird get it? She gets it through her education. These professors may not directly reference the man. And Alinsky wouldn't want them to reference it. Alinsky's probably in hell laughing right now because basically he's corrupted the whole system. And unless you're well read enough, you have no idea he was the one that did it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
What we have done is we have allowed the well of knowledge to be poisoned. And it has been poisoned much more effectively than the liberals did during Machen's time. Because the liberals during Machen's time were at least honest.
Yes.
How do we get to a point where I have a New Testament professor at a supposedly Christian seminary that denies that Jesus is the Son of God? Verbally, out loud, we get there by a series of steps. Neo-Orthodoxy had already softened up the seminaries. Outright higher
By the
criticism.
way, you're young, you're going to Lancaster Seminary, and you're running into these ideas, your head's got to be exploding.
Well, Donald, I got into fights. They tried to kick me out of that place 3 times. Literally, I was brought up on disciplinary charges to be removed from the school 3 different times. the fact that I carried a 4.0, and the fact that I could actually elucidate my arguments. Donald, I stood before the Southern Conference Standing Committee, Ordination Committee, for 5 hours while they questioned me in Greek, Hebrew, German, and Latin, and had me giving responses trying to stop my ordination.
Man, I had it easy in that sense.
They were terrified of me because they couldn't change me. So they did everything they could to stop me.
And in the process made you into a mighty muscular Superman.
Which is been a long, hard road.
Yeah.
I sometimes look back. I was offered to go into the chaplaincy back in 2005 with the Army, and I should have. Sometimes I think maybe I should have taken it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have run into the academic pushback there.
But no, it's because one of my buddies in seminary actually went that path. He had actually been in SEALs training and washed out because he broke his ankle. And he decided that he was going to go back, and he ended up going through seminary instead because he had to do something while he healed up and he could get his next chance in. And he ended up deciding he was going to become a chaplain. And that's what he's done for his career. Is he's gone back and he went back into the Army instead of the Navy and became a chaplain.
By speaking of seminaries, Princeton Seminary constantly publishes on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Get your MA in this or get your MDiv in that. And every time I see it, I put under a comment under it, no WCF, no PTS. And yesterday, somebody posted under my remark, /mark justice for Machen, supporting my point of view.
That's cool.
And then I posted in response to him, justice for the Hodges. And last time I was at Princeton, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, maybe, I went into Samuel Miller Chapel. That's their chapel. 3 or 4 pillars at the front, kind of old colonial architecture. And I walked into the narthex, and they used to have all of the famous Princetonians on little tablets, got like memorials and dates, their birth, death date, and maybe a statement or two. Last time I was there, those were all gone. It's like cancel culture.
It's because it is. But see,
And
cancel culture comes from all of this.
yeah, and my last visit to Hampden Sydney Seminary in Hampden, Sydney, Virginia, where Robert Dabney is buried and William Peck, 2 great Southern Presbyterian theologians. They used to have, as you go into the library, a great big, huge picture of Robert Dabney.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I went in, the picture's gone. The first time I visited that library, I went in, I saw the picture, I talked to one of the senior librarians or archivalists. He sat down and went through Robert Dabney this, Dabney that, favorably, and said, we've got his papers, blah, 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 blah. And he started this church and that church. So, I mean, that was my experience 3 or 4 times at Hampden Sydney College. Last time I was there, that picture was gone. I went over to the front desk. There were a couple of young students there behind the library desk, and they said they didn't know anything about him. So they canceled Dabney as well. No Westminster Confession, no Princeton Seminary for me.
But Donald, it's part of the Hegelian process. Their God ultimately is progress. And if you look to the past, they think you cannot progress to the future.
Gotcha. Yeah, those are
So,
stumbling blocks.
right, because the past may cause you to be called into account for what you're doing.
So
So,
implicit to the system is the erasure of history.
yes. Well, look at what did Mao do in China?
I don't know.
Mao in China destroyed, he had a period where he had the party literally destroying thousands of years of Chinese history, Buddhist temples, Taoist shrines. Mao was going through China burning anything that would reflect on the old empire. He got rid of all the holy text and he wrote his little red book, and that became the holy text of China for years. Lenin and Stalin co-opted Russian history, and they took all of Russian, they co-opted the Orthodox Church. They got their own bishops in. When they realized they couldn't eliminate the church, they co-opted the church. And they started to change everything in Russian history to fit the Marxist paradigm of progress.
Well, I think you see that with John Henry Newman trying to undo English church history.
Exactly. Well, Peter always says that what Anglo-Catholicism is today, like if you were to look at the ACC, the APCK, any of them, even the Anglo-Catholic wings of the Episcopal and the ACNA, they are late Victorian high church liberals with a very low view of Scripture. Peter says that in Anglicanism, the Anglo-Catholicism that won out are essentially the progressives of their age.
Gotcha.
If you were to look at them today, they don't look like progressives. But the reason why they hold so tightly to mama's drapes and vows and the incense and this and that and the other is because they have no respect for Scripture. So what grounds them is all the fluff around them. Now, the problem with that is you get the wrong players in, like these Alinskyites and all that got in the Episcopal Church. You end up with them subverting even those structures to cause them to represent things they were never meant to, because there's no substance.
Speaking of Alinsky, and Hillary Clinton did her undergraduate thesis on Alinsky. She went to law school, met Bill, got married, but she was on a committee, Watergate committee, and she got fired because she would lie. And I'm wondering if she bought into the moral relativism of Alinsky and the willingness to use lies to advance your bigger agenda.
Well, you know she did. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's self-evident look at the email server situation when she was Secretary of State.
Yeah.
She was obviously doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. So she's literally, do you understand?
I do. I do. I get
And I mean, and it's like when I was saying with Sutton, I do not think Sutton directly studied Alinsky. I think Sutton imbibed Alinsky from the academic environments that he was in. This is what has happened to academics. Academics is no longer about teaching people, it's about training either foot soldiers or leaders. It is indoctrination. And it was always, all right, in a weird way, I was asked, why did I stay at Lancaster? I've been asked that repeatedly.
Interesting.
And I will tell you the reason why I stayed at Lancaster is the school taught a perspective that was radically different from my own. The only way I'm going to learn and grow as a person is to constantly be exposed to ideas different than mine and learn how to adapt and how to overcome them. Iron sharpens iron. A sword is worthless unless it's been through the fire and it's been put to the stone. When I talk about the Steers in Ney Park, they have lived comfortably at Westminster and then gone comfortably into their OPC and their PCA churches.
I wouldn't say comfortably. Westminsterians, at least in my day, were forced to walk straight up to the enemy face to face, not run, not retreat, not be, and to sense and to know the opposition and then to answer the opposition. So we were in like a different crucible than you were because we were reading Teilhard Chardin and Bultmann and the Graf Wellhausians and uh, Karl Barth. We had to face them and answer them.
But Donald, you were a generation before me.
Yeah, I don't know where they're at now or what.
I've not seen that in the ones that would be in my cohort. I've seen an increasing amount of ghettoization. I've seen it with the Missouri Synod also, and I'm afraid it's going to end up being the death of the Missouri Synod because the more they ghettoize, the weaker they get. Not weaker as a denomination, weaker as the intellectual powerhouses they were, because they never forced themselves out of their circles to train.
Okay.
Strength can only be developed through conflict. And we live in a conflict averse society. We live in a harm averse society. I'm not saying harm is good. I'm saying that it is only through pain can we get strong. It is only.
That's the idea of boot camp for Marines.
But I mean, it's a truism about humanity, whether it be, I think it's the way God made us. In any discipline you adopt, it is only when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone that you grow. I would rather fail than succeed because success has a tendency to breed weakness. Failure, if it is adopted the right way, breeds strength. And I stayed at Lancaster because the longer I was at Lancaster, the more I learned the inner workings of the system. And people say, well, it was a UCC seminary. And it was, but a third of the students were United Methodist. Another third of the students were PCUSA. There were actually more outside of the UCC than inside of the UCC that went to school when I was there. I had to deal with ELCA Lutherans and I had to work in their churches. I had to deal with Disciples of Christ. I had to deal with apostate Roman Catholics. I had to deal with all these people. And what I learned is their differences were all set dressing. Theologically, philosophically, they were all of the same mindset. They only maintained their differences in order to be able to infiltrate their individual churches. I mean, I had to listen to Jeremiah Wright basically tell a homiletics seminar that you preach whatever way best communicates these ideas to your congregation, because the point is to get the idea across, not to adopt and adapt. because what we want to do is to change the way these people think.
I wonder
And
if
that's,
he's still alive and preaching.
I don't know, I ain't got no use for the man, but I learned from him.
Yeah.
And this Hegelianism is what is behind it all. And Alinsky takes the Hegelian philosophy, he takes the Marxist utopianist religion. And that's what Marxism is. It's not a philosophy, it's a religion. It's why when you confront the woke crowd, they react like religious extremists.
Yeah.
They do not, and they are in this purity cycle because where they took root was in New England, and they literally adopted the worst elements of New England Puritanism and rejected anything good that may have come along with it. They adapted the witch burning trials. They adapted all cancel culture is a revival of the witch trials of the early colonial period.
Interesting.
And you can see it in the purity spiral and all the rest. But Alinsky basically gave the set of tools and weapons to the cultural Marxists that had infiltrated every element of academia during the late 60s. And they used them to disseminate these ideas to where they have taken over and shaped the culture. And your normies have just played into it. It's like I said, the neoconservative movement is nothing but a form of Trotskyite philosophy because their founders were Trotskyites that had rejected the actual economic Marxism, but there's still this one world order, this unified economy, this, it's all for this greater good and all the rest of it, which is not biblical. And I watched the Falwells and all the quote unquote moral majority in the 80s fall for it and basically sell the soul of the conservative churches and the Baptist tradition. To where at this point in time, most of your quote unquote conservative Baptists are nothing more than the religious wing of the Republican Party instead of being actually the church. And I mean, I'm not saying I'll even say, I'll say on your podcast, I voted for Trump 3 times because what else am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's not because I'm a convinced Republican. It's because what was the alternative?
Yeah.
Some lunatic puppet? Because that's basically what they ran against him all 3 times.
Yeah.
And I know we seem to be going off, but I don't think people understand the mess the world's in. Look at the Europeans, and I know I'm probably going to make some of our audience mad. Europe, the European countries, if you compare Europe pre-World War I to Europe now, Europe pre-World War I was highly nationalistic, culturally Christian. I mean, it was a completely different place. And it's almost like the modern Europeans have destroyed themselves culturally, socially, everything else by trying to become exactly the opposite of what their forebears were. Pre-World War I Europe was militantly capitalist, militantly Christian, and militantly nationalistic. Now it's militantly European Union, militantly socialist, and militantly atheist. Why?
Big question.
And they're basically committing social suicide. Basically, this Marxist mentality is nothing more than a giant death cult. And I say it's a giant death cult because they're teaching white people to hate themselves.
Yeah.
They're infantilizing other racial groups by making them dependent upon the state. They are supporting transgender LGBT issues, which are anti-natalist. Even if I go beyond the whole concept of it's wrong biblically according to Romans 1 and Leviticus, it is anti-natalist. There should be no such thing as an atheist that supports the LGBT movement, because the LGBT movement is cultural suicide. They support feminism, which is by its nature anti-natalist. It supports abortion, it supports euthanasia. Everything about the social Marxist movement is nothing more than a glorified suicide cult that wants to destroy everything that is in Western culture at all, and gives it nothing to replace it with. But that comes from its Marxist roots. If you read the Communist Manifesto, this is implicit even in the manifesto, that what you have is Marx telling us we need to destroy the system, but never actually giving us a system to replace it with. Marx just simply believes that the proletariat will all join together and sing Kumbaya and keep everything going, and everybody will share and share alike. It's why I also say, I got into a little bit of trouble about this the other day, and I've been meaning on calling Ryan and explaining my point. You cannot have, Marxism is a Christian heresy. It is a Christian heresy because it is a religion of the book, the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. It has its own clergy, which are the party leaders. It is apocalyptic. It is striving toward this grand apocalypse, which will issue in a utopian new age. It takes Christ's views on uplifting and supporting those who are weaker than you, and it basically militarizes that. It's nothing but Christianity without Jesus, and on top of that, it is a philosophy that could not have been created at any point in time in world history if the church didn't exist. Because Christ created a sense of humility in Western culture. Western culture has the ability to look upon itself, self-reflect, and admit its wrongs. It's because we live in a shame-based, not a shame-based, what is it called? I can't remember. Our culture, because it comes out of Christendom, we do not see it wrong to admit that we're wrong, because we are constantly confessing our sins to God day by day. Yeah. Therefore, false ideas can exist and grow. If Karl Marx had been born in the Ottoman Empire, how long do you think he would have been allowed to walk around spouting off this stuff? Yeah. And I heard once that English colonial governments were asking Africa, why is it that you educate the Africans when, as soon as you educate them, they end up trying to lead a revolution? And the answer that the colonial governor said, because it's the right thing to do.
Gotcha.
Ultimately, Marxism can only exist within a Christian context. And when you take it out of a Christian context, it completely collapses.
By the way, I don't know if you've been following the New York City mayoral race with this Mondani.
Yeah.
But he's a super socialist. And he just said this morning he's going to empty the jails in New York City. Talk about suicide.
Well, it's what they did in North Carolina with the mental institutions. All right. When I came to Paul's Chapel for years, and even under me, I even served on the border crisis ministry for about 5 years, the homeless shelter in Lexington, till I got into a fight with the mayor anyway. But served on we were always involved with the homeless shelter, and we stayed because you've got to have volunteers to stay every night at the shelter. It's just a safety thing, so you can let people in and let people out, because you got to lock it down and this and that and the other to keep the drug dealers and the addicts out. Well, I would always take my one night a month to stay at the shelter as a volunteer. When I first got here, for about the first 2 years, so we'll say 12, 13, 14, the shelter had a capacity of 65 men, 40 women that we watched over, because we didn't deal with the family side. The family side took care of itself. Where the homeless families lived at, we never reached up to about half capacity. And then sometime late 14, when Obamacare was sort of starting to take full effect, they shut down Broughton and Dorothea Dix. Do you know what Broughton and Dorothea Dix are?
No.
They were the mental institutions for the state of North Carolina. When they shut down the mental institutions, all they did was turn all these people loose. Homeless rates skyrocketed everywhere, because about half of these homeless people that are on the streets are people that, when you see the homeless wandering around, about half of them are not what you would historically think of as being homeless, because about half of them are people that would have been taken care of by the mental health care facilities that our federal government quit funding. So when you see instances like what happened in Charlotte the other day,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
what you're seeing, and I'm not defending the action, the guy, not any of that. I would even argue with George Floyd and a couple of the others that started the whole BLM thing. There are people that 20 years ago wouldn't be on the streets anyway.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't surprise me he's going to empty the prisons. I've kept you too long, Donald. It's 11:09.
Okay, well, what is today? Tuesday? I'll see you Friday.
I'll see you Friday.
Okay, bye.
All right.